I said, "Drop the controller." The deputy barked, hand hovering near his holster as he closed the distance across my property line. Like it didn't exist, my thumb froze above the joystick. The drone, still hovering 100 feet above, cast a faint humming shadow on the dry ranch grass. I kept my other hand raised. Empty. Open. This is federal airspace. I'm within my rights. Tell that to the screaming neighbor who said you're filming her bedroom. He snapped, jerking the controller from my hands. I blinked hard, trying not to laugh or lose it. You're talking about Karen Mitchell, right? The same woman who tried to fine me last month for having a barn deread for community standards. She called 911, the deputy said, ignoring me. Claims you were flying it intentionally over her land. Beeping, violating privacy, possibly scouting for theft. There it was. The accusation was so absurd it bordered on comic. If it didn't come with the weight of a Glock, backup on the way, and a nosy crowd assembling near the fence line. Sir, I said, steady now. I'm not some teenager spying with a toy. That drone is part of a secure operations test, authorized and scheduled for Homeland Ops. You're interfering with a federal project. He scoffed. Oh, what? Now you work for the government? I lead the test team, I said flatly. That stopped him for about 3 seconds. Then he smirked, like I'd just claimed to be James Bond. Got ID to prove that. Not on me. You're detaining me on my own land. That's funny, came another voice, hers, sliding in like ice water. Karen Mitchell, HOA queen, and professional neighborhood threat magnet, stood behind the deputy, arms crossed, lips pursed like she'd tasted something rotten. I told you, she hissed. He's always up to something out here. Drones, late-night truck deliveries. One time, I saw 5 men in tactical gear walking into his barn. You mean the Homeland Ops agents? I snapped, before turning to the deputy. Check the FAA clearance. Operation Code 6B. You'll find my name, Adrian Cole, stamped on every authorization form, but no one moved. Not the deputy. Not Karen. They just stared like I'd confessed to a crime that hadn't even been invented yet. That's when the drone feed, still active in the deputy's vest camera, buzzed to life with a grainy thermal image. 2 figures crouching behind Karen's house, partially concealed under a stack of lumber. I leaned toward the screen. There, that's what the drone's been tracking. Not her curtains. The breach in her backyard fence. You're lying, Karen snapped, her voice cracking. But I wasn't. Because 2 hours earlier, Homeland Security had pinged a threat simulation marker precisely in that sector. And I, Adrian Cole, wasn't just running the test, I was responsible for proving how well the civilian systems handled the breach. Spoiler, they failed. And in that instant, the real twist took shape, not just for Karen, but for the 2 deputies now sweating under their vests. Because they had just interfered with a Homeland Security field integrity scan, because they were caught on drone footage, breaching chain of command in a live federal simulation. Because Karen's 911 call had officially triggered a national-level security alert. The kind with the kind with no warnings. And none of them, not Karen, not the officer, still gripping my drone controller, had the faintest clue what they'd just walked into. The kind with black SUVs, the kind with no warnings. 3 minutes later, 2 matte black Suburbans skidded onto the gravel entrance. No sirens, just silence and precision. 4 agents stepped out in formation, dressed not in uniforms but in federal-grade tactical blacks with minimalist insignias, DHS. The deputy who had grabbed my controller took 1 step back as the lead agent raised a hand. Adrian Cole. The agent asked, ignoring everyone else. President, you were interrupted during test grid echo. Drone grounded. Feed compromised. Local interference. Confirmed. The agent nodded. We saw the flag go red. Recover control. Unit, immediately. The deputy hesitated, then slowly extended the controller back to me like it was made of uranium. I took it without a word. The drone's feed blinked once, reconnected, and resumed tracking. The thermal targets hadn't moved. To unauthorized actors near the Mitchell residence, I confirmed. Confirmed on our end. Intercept team, en route. Karen's expression didn't just shift, it collapsed. Her mouth opened, but her words didn't follow. She turned toward the deputy, expecting a save. He looked at her like she was a civilian. Stranger now, which she was. Did she make the 911 call? The agent asked. Yes, I replied. Did the call claim threat from your aerial equipment? Yes. Were you operating within FAA parameters? Fully cleared. Coordinates, altitude, and transmission log verified on pre-brief. Did she approach your property during ops? She crossed the fence line and began filming. With a cell phone, log it. The agent turned, gesturing to one of his team. Karen tried to interject, but the agent kept moving. She reached for her phone again. A second agent stepped forward, scanned the screen once, and calmly removed it from her hand. This is a federal audit site, he told her. You are not authorized to document classified operational procedures. I didn't know, she snapped. You weren't supposed to. That was the test. Karen blinked. What test? The agent didn't repeat himself. Meanwhile, the intercept team approached the rear perimeter of her house. Two crouched figures, the same ones flagged by my drone, were pulled from behind the stack of lumber and pinned to the ground. Karen gasped. "I don't know them." "No one said you did," the agent said flatly. The men were processed, tagged, and loaded into one of the Suburbans within 60 seconds. No shouting, no Miranda rights. The operation wasn't law enforcement, it was protocol enforcement. The deputy cleared his throat. "Are you saying this was deliberate? Like a setup?" "It was a systems integrity test," I replied. "Your dispatch center was monitored. Response times were logged. Civilian interference was expected. False calls were part of the scenario, but intervention was not." He stared at me. Then the agent. "So, we failed." The agent raised one brow. "You responded with authority to a non-threat. You disabled federal equipment. You obstructed a drone sweep on an active flag. Yes, you failed. But we didn't know. That's the point." One of the agents handed me a sealed folder hard copy, debrief packet, time-stamped and logged. I signed without opening it. Karen made a last-ditch attempt. "So, you were spying on my house?" "No," I said. "The breach was tagged on your fence line. You just happened to be in the frame, but you didn't tell anyone. You just ran your little test in secret. The integrity of the response is only measurable if the system believes the threat is real." "And what? Now I'm in trouble for calling 911. You triggered a false flag in a Tier 2 test zone," the agent said. "You crossed into restricted ops without clearance. That carries consequences." She stepped back, finally understanding she wasn't going to be shielded by her name, her homeowner's title, or the neighborhood board. None of that mattered. "Here," the deputy tried once more. "Look, we weren't briefed. How were we supposed to know this guy's some kind of handler?" I turned to him. "Because I briefed your precinct last month. Your supervisor signed off. Grid Echo's field test calendar was posted. This wasn't a surprise drop. You missed the memo," the agent confirmed. "Your department received digital and physical briefings, and this isn't the first time protocol has been disregarded on this property." Karen swallowed hard. "We will be issuing a formal incident report to DHS oversight," the agent added. "There will be internal review." "And her?" the deputy asked. "She's being documented as an unregistered actor, triggering a federal interference chain. Is that, like a charge?" "That's up to compliance." The agents returned to the vehicles. The drone landed precisely where it had launched. Test Grid Echo was done. Not passed, not failed, just done, with results logged, and fallout pending. "Cole," the agent said before closing the SUV door. "Next field evil, expand the off-perimeter buffer. Civilians in this sector have a tendency to escalate." Noted. They drove off. Karen stood still, as if hoping this part would somehow be undone. It WOULDN, single quotes T.40-8 hours later. The incident summary was filed under Homeland Ops case, ID 6BR-ECO72. The report included timestamps, drone feeds, screenshots, GPS logs, dispatch transcripts, and agent bodycam footage. The core conclusion: unauthorized civilian disruption, procedural breach by local enforcement, and compromised test metrics due to premature intervention. Internal Affairs at the County Sheriff's Office initiated a mandatory review. Deputy Monroe, who had seized the controller, was placed on administrative reassignment pending evaluation. His bodycam, which captured his refusal to verify FAA clearance and disregard for Cole's verbal warnings, was flagged as Exhibit B in the DHS brief. Karen Mitchell received a formal cease and desist letter from DHS Compliance Division. Her actions were classified as civil interference with a Tier 2 federal operations field test. The letter referenced potential liability under U.S. Code Title 18, Section 1362. Pending escalation, her HOA board membership was quietly suspended until further review. No appeal option was included. Asterisk. An internal bulletin circulated within Homeland Ops highlighted the incident as a case study. Title: Echo Grid Compromise, Civilian Escalation, Trigger, and Uninformed Enforcement Response. It was tagged for protocol training modules at 3 regional offices. The note underlined Cole's prior briefing to local authorities and the documented failure of that information to disseminate to responding deputies. A review call with Homeland Ops Command was held on day 3. Cole was asked to provide supplemental insight on how to reinforce periphery protocol safeguards. He recommended encrypted geofencing push alerts to all local dispatch terminals prior to test launch. Approved immediately. He also requested clearance to begin hardening the west perimeter of his test zone, specifically the shared boundary with Mitchell's property. Approved without delay. On day 4, a federal contractor team arrived to install motion-triggered perimeter posts along the fence line. Notified under federal jurisdiction, no local consent was required. Mitchell watched from inside her home as contractors drove 3 titanium stakes and mounted sensor boxes, each marked with small white DHS logos. No explanations were offered. 2 days later, an official letter from the Office of Countermeasures, In simulation testing was sent to the state governor's liaison. The letter formally requested that all local departments within the Tri-County area comply with upcoming field test briefings under National Response Simulation Act provisions. Failure to comply would result in exclusion from classified updates and future interagency cooperation lists. An email thread surfaced between the HOA president and board members. Subject: liability concerns. Mitchell incident. Attached was the video still of Karen speaking directly into her phone, standing 5 feet inside Cole's property, accusing him of spying. The clip had been extracted from body cam footage and distributed internally for documentation. The president concluded with a recommendation to suspend her indefinitely from any HOA community action. Pending legal clarification, Mitchell contacted a private attorney. The firm declined to take her case. Federal jurisdiction, they noted, not something we contest. By the end of the week, 2 DHS agents visited the sheriff's office for a closed-door policy realignment meeting. Deputy Monroe was not invited. The briefing included 10 officers and the acting sheriff. Cole's name was mentioned 6 times. The phrase test commander was emphasized each time. The final slide displayed a still image of Monroe seizing the controller. The text below read, "Failure to verify identity before intervention out, protocol breach, threat misclassification, asset interruption." A regional DHS liaison issued a quiet recommendation. Deputies should treat any aerial operation conducted on the Cole property as pre-cleared, unless explicitly instructed otherwise, by Homeland Ops. The phrase used was hands-off until directed. The memo wasn't made public. 3 contracts under Cole's name were expedited through procurement the following Monday. 2 covered drone fleet upgrades. 1 authorized early-stage AI surveillance pattern testing on Phase 2 properties. All marked confidential. Each authorized under the same project name. Grid Echo. No media outlet reported the incident. The federal debrief concluded with a notation. Grid Echo scenarios successfully identified weak response nodes. Target civilian behavior, recorded and documented. Result contained. Further escalation, unnecessary. Cole's operation resumed. Drone activity increased. Test simulations expanded to new vector corridors. Karen Mitchell's phone number was flagged on local dispatch systems as a previous false flag caller. Any future 911 call from her would be automatically escalated for DHS screening before dispatch. The new label, priority, verify before deployment. The Sheriff's Department updated its internal threat protocol list. Cole's name appeared in Section 4B, listed as Registered Federal Ops Coordinator, do not interfere without authorization. The word spy never appeared again in any of the reports, not once. 1 week later, a scheduled audit file was released internally. Within the Department of Homeland Operations, the document included classified background data on Project Grid Echo's origin, its operational layers, and the security classifications associated with each zone. Embedded within the file was a contractor index that identified Adrian Cole, not as a freelance test lead, but as the project's origin architect. Cole's file had been sealed under Tier 3 clearance for the prior 2 years. The disclosure revealed that he had designed and implemented for operational simulations across multiple counties, including a high-fidelity urban infiltration drill for DHS Cyber Threat Division in Zone Kilo. His profile included prior advisory roles with both infrastructure subcommittees and satellite response calibration projects. The Grid Echo designation had not been randomly assigned to Cole. The project was authorized based on his earlier simulation success metrics during the Sierra Loop exercises, where his drone AI correctly identified unauthorized digital relays planted on municipal towers during an unannounced ops drill. The Sierra Loop success rate stood at 98.4%, highest in the department's records for a civilian-developed engagement scenario. His record noted no failed drills. Further disclosures linked Cole's ranch acquisition directly to Project Echo's long-range planning. The property had been purchased using a silent grant fund administered by a federal research body under Department 942E. The land's geographic characteristics had matched necessary isolation, flight clearance, and local jurisdiction that were essential for simulation accuracy. The HOA conflict was categorized under Subnote 4, flagged as community stressor, escalation variable. Karen Mitchell's presence had been included in pretest simulations as a likely trigger profile. Her behavioral data had been logged during 3 prior neighborhood incidents involving code complaints, one of which resulted in a police response to a garage paint dispute. Her call patterns, escalation behavior, and prior HOA complaints had been collected legally through public record aggregators. Her profile status, Category A, predictable civilian escalation trigger. Disclosure of Cole's prior collaboration with the Cyber Infrastructure Advisory Task Force was released to select DHS operatives under Level 2 Red. Meeting transcripts confirmed that Cole had been granted experimental operational flexibility on the condition that his simulations produced Measurable departmental insight into localized civilian interference trends. The 6B ARCO test marked the final stage before Project Scale-Up. The disclosure packet included one previously unreleased clip from the drone's flight. Data, infrared scan, identifying a heat anomaly matching to human figures crawling beneath. A stack of wood each carrying metallic objects, later identified as weapon components. That data point had triggered the red flag alert, which DHS agents later used to justify immediate extraction. The drone's algorithm, designed by Cole, had recognized the pattern against 1,200 stored intrusion signatures and assigned a match probability of 93.2%. A secondary disclosure involved Cole's communications with federal subcontractors. Email exchanges showed his warnings to regional field agents regarding the risk of law enforcement interference based on inconsistent training and debrief compliance in local jurisdictions. A prior test in Grid Delta had experienced similar, partial compromise, though no civilian had crossed into restricted space. Cole's analysis had predicted further breach probability if response transparency was not tightened. Following the Echo incident, that warning was archived with a notation, Validated Field Case ECO 72. The final section of the disclosure included a forward-looking statement. Cole had submitted a revised proposal for Phase 2 deployment. His request included expanded drone authority in rural test zones, priority override for local air traffic notices, and encrypted local brief notifications that bypass standard dispatch protocols. The request was marked pending escalation and forwarded to Strategic Operations Planning with a recommendation to integrate Cole's AI anomaly detection system into broader regional testing protocols. A private memo from Director Ake to Deputy Director Langston read, Cole's framework identifies not just security gaps, but human behavior patterns that trigger those gaps. His use of escalation catalysts, while controversial, provides measurable benefit. Recommend approval for Phase 2 with controlled expansion. Public perception, risk minimal due to jurisdictional opacity and operational classification. Karen Mitchell's name was not included in the distribution list. Her role remained documented under internal civilian trigger logs. A small footnote referenced her interference. With a line, subject unknowingly contributed to validation of Tier 3, Civilian Escalation Framework. The disclosure was limited to federal departments and redacted for contractor-level review. No content was released to public-facing agencies, legal entities, or media outlets. All references to Cole's full operational authority remained classified. The public registry listed him as a federal contractor, UAS systems analyst. No further civilian engagement was authorized in the Grid Echo Zone. Future simulations were approved for passive civilian proximity monitoring only, with active intervention immediately flagged as breach. Karen Mitchell received a final notice. Her property bordered a designated federal test perimeter. Any contact, surveillance, or obstruction of activities on the Cole property would be subject to direct DHS review. Her reply was not recorded. 17 days after the Grid Echo incident. For other simulation zones, submitted anomaly reports involving similar civilian interference patterns. Grid Bravo recorded a local farmer cutting power to a test relay after misidentifying it as an illegal tower. Grid Foxtrot logged a rancher disabling a ground sensor unit due to concerns about property lines. Grid Sierra experienced drone disabling attempts, using handheld signal jammers purchased online. Each case followed a near-identical progression. Unbriefed civilians encountering operational hardware, misidentifying its function, acting without verification, and triggering premature local enforcement involvement. In 3 out of 4 cases, the civilians contacted law enforcement with language mirroring Karen Mitchell's 911 transcript phrases, including spying, unauthorized surveillance, and possible trespassing. Cole submitted a pattern analysis to Homeland Ops strategic response. His report consolidated event data across 6 zones and matched interference triggers to specific civilian response archetypes. The document categorized escalation types into 3 profiles. Type A, escalatory civilians. Type B, uninformed law enforcement responders. And Type C, non-compliant dispatch systems. The datasets showed a 78% commonality rate in the timeline, from initial equipment visibility to enforcement arrival, with the majority of disruptions occurring within 7 minutes of civilian visual contact. In each scenario, local authorities failed to validate field operation clearances before engagement. Cole's report proposed a recalibration of civilian proximity alert parameters in Tier 2 zones, raising the threshold for visual detection suppression. The recommendation included deployment of passive cloaking modifications to low-altitude drone units, installation of minimal signature periphery nodes, and mandatory data burst briefings to regional enforcement systems before simulation launch. Homeland Ops approved Phase 1 integration of the pattern recognition module into the simulation dashboard. The system was assigned an autonomous ID, EcoShield. The first implementation occurred in Grid November. The initial test, successful. No civilian engagement. No law enforcement interference. Full simulation completion. Cole's predictive model achieved a 94.6% scenario completion rate on the first trial. A follow-up intelligence briefing confirmed that civilian escalation behavior was most frequent in regions with low prior exposure to federal drills and high concentrations of independent property owners with strong local jurisdiction bias. Cole tagged these as civilian friction zones. Grid Echo had been the control group for the pattern. Internal review notes highlighted Karen Mitchell as a perfect match for the Category A profile. Her prior HOA conflict records, history of initiating enforcement contact without verification, and pattern of misidentifying procedural authority were listed as matching traits. The term Mitchell threshold was added to the EcoShield interface, defined as the probability level at which civilian escalation becomes statistically inevitable once equipment is visually confirmed by an unbriefed individual. Cole integrated this into EcoShield's early warning system. Once a Mitchell threshold breach was detected, the system would trigger a silent redirection of drone flight path, auto-lock communications blackout with local networks, and elevate internal alerts for agent intervention preparedness. The Mitchell threshold variable was tested in Grid Lima 3 days later. A retired contractor noticed a drone unit near his property and began calling neighbors. EcoShield flagged the social behavior cluster, auto-activated adaptive flight correction, and neutralized the escalation chain within 90 seconds. No calls were made. The drone re-entered normal pathing once the variable dropped below risk margin. Logged as a successful deployment, Cole's behavioral analytics model was submitted to DHS Behavioral Systems Division. The submission included regional heat maps based on predicted civilian escalation probability using socio-behavioral data, layered with geographic density and prior enforcement response inconsistencies. The model projected a 34% efficiency increase in uninterrupted simulation completions. If EcoShield was deployed agency-wide, Strategic Command approved phased deployment across 9 additional zones. Cole was allocated an expanded operational team and priority resource pipeline for continued EcoShield development. A confidentiality clause was attached to his new classification. Public designation updated to Senior Operational Architect, Simulation Integrity Group. No additional contact occurred between Cole and Karen Mitchell. Her record remained under Civilian Compliance Watch but was removed from active test documentation. The EcoShield system continued to update her behavioral profile through public record scraping, maintaining passive logs for future escalation risk prediction. One additional clause was added to HOA regulatory bulletins in the Echo Zone. No member may initiate external complaint procedures regarding aerial activity or land use adjacent to designated DHS test properties without formal verification request filed in writing. The clause was passed unanimously by the board, with no objections recorded. A secondary memo from DHS noted the systemic value of the Karen Mitchell case. The phrase used in the internal summary, prototype civilian friction incident validated model trajectory. Cole received the final green light to begin Phase 2. Urban integration trials. The trial zones were selected using EcoShield's escalation probability model. 3 urban districts, each marked by mixed residential commercial zoning, high civilian density, inconsistent law enforcement training history, and documented civilian complaint volatility. Labels assigned: Urban Grid Alpha, Urban Grid Delta, Urban Grid Theta. Initial deployment focused on Grid Alpha. Cole's team installed discrete infrastructure nodes in municipal zones with dense pedestrian activity. Devices were embedded within standard city equipment, utility poles, maintenance panels, transit signs. Drone activity was restructured for vertical pattern surveillance and low exposure altitude to minimize visual disruption. Before activation, local precincts were issued standard briefings via encrypted relay. Each document outlined simulation parameters, provided key contact protocols, and listed emergency override triggers. A test contact response form was included for validation. Return compliance was 66%. Remaining 34% failed to acknowledge receipt or confirm integration procedures. EcoShield auto-flagged the non-compliant precincts. Civilian friction zones were mapped accordingly, and internal timers were activated for escalation risk tracking. The system logged local social media feeds, filtered by geofencing and escalation-prone keywords. The live monitoring interface tagged predictive flags. Phrases including drones in the sky, black van near school, and government tower triggered elevation responses. Cole's team conducted 5 microtests in Grid Alpha. Predictive model identified potential escalation patterns before local authorities were contacted. Each incident was neutralized through silent repositioning, drone altitude alteration, or relay rerouting. All 5 simulations completed without interference. Grid Delta deployment began on day 12. 3 hours into the initial simulation, Ekrich logged a visual anomaly report from a residential window camera. The homeowner posted a video labeled Mystery Drone on a local forum. Within 17 minutes, the post received 48 interactions. The system assigned a risk value of 82.3% under Mitchell Threshold Protocol. Auto-triggered response. Activated drone was redirected to high-altitude standby, and perimeter surveillance shifted to adjacent grid sectors. Meanwhile, the system flagged a commenter with an attached history of prior city council complaints involving public surveillance concerns. Name matched archived data. Civilian ID, Travis Hale. Profile, generated in 2019 after an unrelated noise. Ordinance dispute escalated to litigation. EchoShield pulled archived behavioral data. Identified Hale as a high-probability escalation node. The system assigned a live monitor to his communications channels. Within 40 minutes, Hale contacted a local reporter. Transcription of the call showed that Hale referred to the drone as unmarked federal surveillance. The outlet declined to publish, citing lack of source credibility. Cole's system logged the interaction, flagged the outlet, and tagged Hale's address for visual avoidance in future flight routing. Simulation resumed 3 hours later after algorithmic cooling. Protocols cleared the flagged sector. Grid Theta became the first test site with an active local law enforcement intervention. EchoShield logged the sequence in real time. A patrolling officer spotted the drone hovering near a transit station maintenance terminal. Despite being part of the simulation field, the officer failed to recognize the drone's ID tag. Body transcript captured the officer reporting unidentified aerial device, followed by unsanctioned attempt to signal it using flashlight pulses. Cole's command interface received a flag. EchoShield responded with standard protocol, vertical clearance, passive relocation, dispatch notification. The officer's report was cross-checked against prior compliance logs. His department had not submitted the validation form. The precinct was already listed under non-confirmed briefing receipt. The interaction was logged under test condition breach, but the drone remained undamaged. Simulation redirected to alternate route. The breach was categorized as minor interference. The precinct received a formal notice of procedural lapse. Following the Theta breach, Cole submitted a proposal to DHS recommending mandatory pre-deployment validation acknowledgement as a gating mechanism. No acknowledgement, no drone entry. The memo stated, system predictability is only as strong as human compliance allows. Passive monitoring is ineffective if authorized departments remain unresponsive. The proposal was accepted. Policy adjusted. New deployments now included hard validation deadlines. Zones failing to confirm were auto. From live testing, in parallel, EchoShield generated its first cross-zone civilian escalation heatmap. The output showed that while rural zones faced slower response timelines, urban zones produced faster escalation but shorter disruption periods owing to higher saturation of conflicting input signals and fragmented attention span within civilian groups. Cole marked this as a key behavioral distinction between urban and rural interference patterns. His next model variant integrated this factor as an escalation modulation variable. By day 27, EchoShield's live detection response time across all 3 urban zones had dropped below 2.3 seconds. The number of successful simulation completions increased to 91.7%. Civilian escalation drops were attributed to real-time predictive rerouting, pattern suppression triggers, and dynamic boundary masking. Cole submitted a new strategic brief. Title: Pre-escalation, Behavior Disruption, Real-Time Mitigation. At subvisual threshold, the model's next evolution was greenlit for development. Phase 3 designation, Predictive Suppression Layer. Development began with integration of subvisual behavior indexing, drawing from thermal response data, micromovement tracking, and historical civilian behavioral deviation logs. New module utilized nonverbal response mapping align, shift patterns, hand tension, fluctuation, and posture deviation, captured through edge proximity sensors and low-exposure drone optics. Cole's team deployed test units in 2 new urban overlay zones, Grid Sigma and Grid Omega. Each zone was selected based on prior failed simulation history under legacy systems. Suppression layer trials focused on intercepting the escalation loop before verbal or physical action occurred. Metrics prioritized: time to initial visual contact (TIVC), time to cognitive classification (TCC), and time to behavior redirection (TBR). Initial Sigma results showed TIVC median at 4.1 seconds. EchoShield's sublayer activated visual suppression protocol at 3.7 seconds, successfully redirecting the target subject's visual attention to a non-operative quadrant using light frequency modulation and indirect motion vectors. Subject exited the detection vector without incident. Simulation continued uninterrupted. Omega Zone featured multi-subject tracking. During day 3, 4 individuals approached a restricted simulation relay disguised within a telecom service enclosure. One subject paused, scanned the box, and reached for a phone. Predictive suppression layer initiated low frequency, distraction signal auditory but non-identifiable. Subject stopped, hesitated, retracted movement, and continued walking. No calls were made. Data logs indicated behavior redirection, achieved below 2.5 seconds post-initial anomaly interest. Redirection classified as soft diversion, achieved through peripheral environmental modulation without cognitive recognition by the subject. Logged as Category 0 intervention. Cole's interface dashboard was updated with live recalibration. Inputs, zones where suppression failed, triggered instant algorithmic correction. Failures were analyzed by rate of movement, unpredictability, external noise variables, and multiple simultaneous civilian visual contacts from opposite approach angles. Adjustments included widening the optical occlusion fields and increasing sensor fusion tolerance to account for signal bounce from reflective surfaces. The system evolved into a live learning model. EchoShield suppression protocols were now self-adjusting within 30 milliseconds of deviation detection. Cole authored the calibration framework manually, rejecting automated scripting for core algorithm weight distribution. Human-reviewed pattern assignments were reprioritized over pure machine assumptions. Margin of error reduced to 0.4%. One of the final benchmark trials occurred during Grid Sigma Night Phase 2. A sanitation worker entered a restricted alley segment. During scheduled drone surveillance, motion sensors detected an unexpected stop. Worker glanced upward for 1.2 seconds. Suppression protocol activated a low-motion redirection pulse via secondary drones stationed in an adjacent visual zone. Worker resumed normal walking speed within 0.8 seconds. Subsequent reviews showed the subject had not retained the visual anomaly in short-term memory. Post-incident interview conducted as part of unrelated survey research confirmed no recollection of anything unusual during that work segment. Case marked as confirmation of deep suppression success under Phase 3. Cole submitted final calibration report. Suppression threshold now active at subrachial level, providing uninterrupted simulation flow without requiring subject awareness or post-event incident risk. The report's executive summary concluded, predictive suppression layer enables pre-disruption, rerouting without confrontation, escalation, or exposure. System functions silently, at perceptual margins. Civilian interference neutralized before formation. DHS Systems Oversight approved the model for transition into integrated deployment tier. Phase 4 authorized under codename Phantom Layer. This stage allowed Cole's protocol to operate in active urban zones during high periods. No pre-briefing to local authorities required. All enforcement validation became internal to EcoShield's autonomous compliance check nodes. Deployment initiated in Grid Upsilon First, Tier 1 civilian zone. Foot traffic density threshold 8,000 individuals per square mile. Suppression layer maintained 96.2% redirection success over 7 days. Only 2 minor contacts escalated to verbal acknowledgement of device presence. Neither involved follow-up action. One subject who posted a brief social media mention of an odd-looking camera near the bus stop received no interaction. EchoShield marked the post as non-viral, assigned it a 0 disruption rating, and logged it for passive monitoring. No further posts followed. Across all test zones, Cole's suppression framework eliminated the need for reactive intervention. Enforcement agencies remained in passive monitoring roles. No civilian confrontations, no false calls, no agency interference. The calibration phase concluded with a single-line result annotation, simulations now invisible. Cole received clearance to deploy Phantom Layer into permanent Tier 1 operational use. No press release followed, no documentation published. Public notice issued. The system no longer waited for disruption to occur. It prevented the thought.